Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are dialing in from. I'm Rita McGrath, a professor at Columbia Business School, and it's Friday. So we're going to have a fabulous Friday chat by the fireside. My guest this week is Ruth Gotian, who is an assistant professor at Weill Medical School, as well as many other things. She's been identified by Thinkers50 as one of the brightest upcoming new thinkers on the radar. And she has a great new book out called The Success Factor, which is called Developing the Mindset and Skill Set for Peak Business Performance, which features interviews with, NIH researchers, Nobel Prize laureates, mountain climbers, and my personal favorite, the Jamaican bobsledding team. So welcome, Ruth. Delighted to see you.
Hello, my friend. How are you? I'm
Good.
so excited to be here with you.
Me too. It's been a while. We've been planning this for a while, and it took a while for the stars to align.
Yes.
So let's start off with, tell us a little bit about your journey, because it hasn't been, your own journey is pretty interesting, aside from what you document in the book.
It's been definitely a winding road, which is, I think everyone has that winding road. I studied business for undergrad and grad school. And like all good business students, I thought I would do what was expected and go into finance. And guess what? I didn't like it. So I switched back into higher education, which is something I had done since I was 18. I was that RA and that hall director everyone had in college. And after my banking days, I wanted to work with graduate students. I wanted to work with people who had too much to lose. And I wound up running a combined MD PhD program between Weill Cornell, Rockefeller, and Sloan Kettering. And I had done that for 22 years. And at the age of 43, while working full time and raising my family and having elder care for my parents, I said, let's add one more thing. And I went back to school to get my doctorate. And I have been obsessed with success for a very, very long time. And I decided to make that the topic of my dissertation and haven't stopped since.
Oh, is that where the book came from?
Because the original research was on the most successful physician scientists of our generation. And since then, I found 4 elements of success. And I was curious if what I found in those, the Surgeon Generals, the Nobel Prize winners, et cetera, if the same thing would be found in other extreme high achievers. Mm-hmm. So that's when I started interviewing the astronauts and the Olympic champions and the CEOs. And I realized they all have the same 4 mindsets. And that's where the book came. The book was actually at the push and recommendation of the former Surgeon General of the United States, Dr. David Satcher.
Oh, and how did he push you into doing that?
I told him about my research one day. We had a meeting, and he said, this is when it was about physician scientists, because he's a physician scientist. And he said, this is really interesting. People would really be fascinated about this. I said, Dr. Satcher, I'm fascinated by it. I don't know who else is truly fascinated. He said, no, mark my words. And then I started continuing it to these other high achievers, and I started talking about it. And that's when I realized that I was not the only one fascinated with success. And that's what led to the book.
That's a great story. I mean, I find often books do come because someone says, you're onto something here. Isn't it true?
Yes. And, I, like most people, I didn't think it was ready, right? It wasn't perfect enough. And in March 2020, I actually got that phone call that no child wants to get, which is, come quickly, daddy's in the hospital. And I flew over, and as I was sitting by his bedside, I had my laptop open, and I was working, and he kept asking me, are you getting ideas for your next book? Because my first book on medical education just came out. I said, no, I'm really just looking for ways to keep you alive. And he kept asking, do you getting ideas for your next book? Are you getting ideas for your next book? And when he passed away in August 2020, I finished sitting Shiva, which is the Jewish mourning period. And a publisher reached out to me about writing a book. And I knew that was my dad nudging me to write it. So when I have the Surgeon General telling me and my dad's nudge between the two of them.
Well, good for you. Good for you. So with, I'm curious about the research, the original dissertation research, because certainly in my world, writing kind of qualitative work is the bar to success is much higher than if you've got some sort of data set that you can number crunch. Is that the same in your world?
It's definitely different. And I think that those who do qualitative research and those who do quantitative research are always at odds as to whose is better, whose is stronger, whose is more prestigious. And you know what? I say the most prestigious is actually mixed methods when you can combine the two. So I made sure to combine the two. But most of the research was actually qualitative research, which really means it's just a different way of thinking about data. We're trying to dive into the why, which means we spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours interviewing people and then looking at the transcripts and coding. There's actually a way to code this kind of data and seeing what we can discern from that. So it's a lot of lonely hours of you and the laptop staring at it, but you just love the people that you're interviewing so much because you have now pulled apart every single word that they've said and really dove into their why. So I'm a tried and true believer in qualitative research, but I have my quantitative research buddies very close at hand so that we can collaborate, because one of the things I love doing more than anything is collaborating with other great people.
That's terrific. Well, one of the things that, and I'm a qualitative researcher myself by and large. I mean, I've done both. But one of the things that I find very frustrating about certainly academic research overall is that most of it focuses on lagging information. And if you think about indicators, right, we have leading indicators, kind of what's going on right now, and then lagging indicators. And most of the quantitative research is parsing data sets that you can't change. They're not telling you anything about the future. And I find that very frustrating. But so let's talk about the book. Let's talk about what your findings are.
Yes. So I found that there were 4 elements of success that all of these extreme high achievers had. And that was sort of my aha moment when I realized that a Nobel Prize winning scientist is just like an astronaut, who's just like an Olympic figure skater. They're all doing these same things. That's when I realized I was onto something. And they're not habits, because we can't copy other people's habits, which I think is where most people fall short. But we can emulate their mindsets. What can we learn from those experiences, from the habits that they have? And that's really what I focused on. And I realized the 4 things that they all had in common was, 1, they tapped into their intrinsic motivation, which is what comes from within. What is it that you love to do? You would do for free if you could. You're not doing it for the awards, the rewards, the promotions, the diplomas, the Nobel, because if you did, you would have quit once you got it. And I don't know of a single Nobel Prize winner who stopped doing science just because they won the Nobel. They love doing it.
Most of them are completely astonished.
They're astonished. Their day continues like it's any other day. They're running lab meetings and submitting grants, et cetera. So they have tapped into their intrinsic motivation. That's the first one.
My dad used to tell a great story. So he was an organic chemist, PhD, 100 patents to his name, really brilliant guy. And he was working with all the other chemists at Xerox back in the day. And he used to come home and say things like, "Oh, I had a really interesting moment today." I said, "What?" He said, "This Nobel Prize winning scientist walked up to the administrative assistant who kind of ran the group, and he said, 'I'm going to go to lunch now, and then I'll stop by the men's room. I expect to be back at 2:00 because she had I need to know where you are.'" I thought that was hilarious. Anyway, intrinsic motivation.
It sounds like she kept them on a short leash, right? And they listened to her. So intrinsic motivation. And the second one is perseverance. It's their work ethic. It's their resilience. But it's not those sexy terms that we're hearing about. It's really how they're viewing challenges. They don't say, "This bad thing happened, I think I'm going to quit. I didn't get the results I wanted. my manuscript was rejected, my grant was rejected, this merger was rejected, whatever it is, they don't quit. They use that as data. Mm-hmm. And they say to themselves, what is the strategy I have not thought of yet? And the second they say, what is the strategy I haven't thought of yet? And add that word yet, now it's no longer just a challenge that someone threw at them. They are now in the driver's seat. And that makes a big difference. So if you think about all of the athletes who were training for the Olympics, where every day is scheduled, just like that admin did to your dad, right? Every minute and everything that they consume is prescribed. But now the Olympics were postponed for a year. So now what happens? I don't know of any of the Olympians who quit. If anything, they doubled down on their training. They found other ways to train, even though they can't meet with their coaches. They can't go to the gym. They said to themselves, what is the strategy I have not thought of yet?
Right. And that's very much connected to, of course, Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset, right? So that would be a combination of growth mindset and perseverance. I think that's fascinating.
Absolutely. It's Angela Duckworth and Carol Dweck together, right?
Right. Well, the other thing that I think is really super interesting about that is if you go at your tasks with that mindset, the amount of agency that you feel is that much accelerated. And I think one of the big things we're seeing now is, the Great Resignation, people reporting being burned out, so much going on. And I think a lot of that comes from really feeling like you have no control, that you just are not in control of situations. And what I picked up from your book was, well, here's a way of feeling like you are in control, right? Like it's up to me to come up with the next strategy for this.
Absolutely. And the last third of the book is really all about action steps, because I can tell you what to do, but if I don't teach you how to do it, it's not going to happen because there's that missing link. Mm-hmm. So I needed to find ways to actually teach the reader to implement all of these things in their own lives, realizing two important things. What works for you, Rita, is not going to work for me. Mm-hmm. We're different people.
Yeah.
Right. And what works for me today is not going to work for me the next time I have a transition in my life, a new job, a new home, a new partner, another child, a pandemic. Transitions are a time when we start to reevaluate our priorities, which means action steps from the past may no longer be relevant and we need new ones. And that's why there's a buffet of options for each of the 4 elements of success.
Yeah, we talked about 2. So we talked about intrinsic motivation and perseverance.
Yes.
Maybe just fill in the blanks on the other 2.
Sure. So the third one is a strong foundation, which is constantly being reinforced. What you have done early in your career, you're going to continue doing later in your career. You never forget those basics because that is what makes you so good. So for example, Neil Katyal, he's an attorney who has argued 45 cases before the Supreme Court of the United States. He does the same 3 things before every single case. The first thing is he prepares a binder that has the answer to every single question that he could possibly get asked. And he brings that binder to the court and puts it on the table right in front of him. He said he's never opened that binder, but preparing it has prepared him for the case. Then he has multiple moot courts. These are simulated court environments that he does before every single one of those court cases. And finally, the night before the opening arguments, his kid's bedtime story becomes the opening arguments of the case, because he said if a child can understand it, the court can understand it. And for every single one of those 45 cases, he's had that same prep, same exact prep. And if you think about the athletes do the same thing, they do the same warm-ups, right? I spoke to Ryan Millar, gold medal volleyball player. He said the warm-up that he did before the Olympics, it's the same warm-up he did in his backyard when he was 7 years old. Mm-hmm. Strong foundation, constantly being reinforced. Mm-hmm. And last but not least,
that takes a lot of discipline, though. I mean, when I look at people that really that I see as being very successful, what you do see is this discipline about how they go about things, right? They're disciplined about their time, they're disciplined about their energy, they're disciplined about what they say yes to and what they say no to. And I think that's hard, right? I mean, to lose weight, eat less, move more. Like that's easy, right? To actually do that thing is really hard.
It certainly sounds that way, but what they have understood is they don't try to do it on their own.
Okay.
They have a team of people who will help them, and we can actually learn from that. And this is where that fourth practice comes in, which is they are constantly open to new knowledge. So if you think of all the billionaires, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Mark Cuban, they're known for reading 3 to 8 hours a day, but it's not the reading that has made them billionaires. It's opening their mind up to new knowledge and making connections that other people don't yet see. And they're willing to get that data, get that information, get that knowledge from anyone who has it. It doesn't have to be another billionaire. It could be a college student if that person is the expert right there who can teach them something. So you can certainly learn from reading books, reading articles, LinkedIn Learning, podcasts, webinars, fireside chats, such as this one. Hopefully people are learning something. And webinars, and of course, talking to other people. Now, all of these high achievers, they're not sitting in a classroom anymore. That's not realistic for a lot of people. So the learning is done informally. It's what we call informal learning. And they also surround themselves, this is going back to your earlier point, with a team of mentors, people who believe in them more than they believe in themselves. Now, if an astronaut, a Nobel Prize winner, and Olympians can have this, why do we think we're better than that and we don't need it? So this is why I encourage everyone to really surround themselves with a team of mentors.
That's a great point. That's a great point. So Wim Burke, one of our regular visitors, wants to know if individual success translates into team success.
Look, it's very much, it becomes addictive, right? If I want to start working out better, I want to then work out with people who are top in their field, because that will really rub off on me. I'm not going to take as many breaks. I'm going to push myself a little bit harder. And this really is, you are the average of the 5 people you are around. That's how you make yourself better, but that's how you can also make your team better, because you are raising expectation of what good looks like. I think too often we are aiming for average. We're always saying, what is the baseline, right? What is that baseline metric? And I say, forget the baseline. Baseline's average. Who wants to be average? Look at how you can exceed that baseline. And trust me, other people will see it and they'll get on board as well.
Interesting. Liz Wiseman makes a similar point in her most recent book, where she talks about impact players, people that just, by the way that they do things, they just raise the performance of the entire group around them, which I think is a really interesting observation too. And she covers some of the same, it's not exactly the same, but she touches on some of the same habits. Like they rise to leadership in the moment. They do persevere at tasks and things like that. That's fascinating.
That's right. That's right.
So we're talking about, if you've just joined us, the book is The Success Factor. My guest is Ruth Gotian. And so let's talk a little bit about some of the things people need to do to, I guess, leverage these 4 things, right? Well, some of the practices you talk about toward the end of the book.
Yeah. So there's actually things that you can do for each of the 4 elements, but I really encourage everyone to start with that first one, with that intrinsic motivation, because there's research that comes out of the Mayo Clinic that says if we can spend just 20% of our time doing what we love, the other things won't deplete us as much. And there's actually lower rates of burnout reported. So you really only need to spend 20% of your time doing that. So what are the ways that you can tap into that? And I think too often we mix up being good at something and being passionate about something, right? I was good at finance. I didn't love it. I didn't love it. So you can be good at things and not love it. And you could be good at things and you loved it at one point, but you don't love it anymore. Not that you don't love the people you're working with, but the challenge is gone.
Yeah, Whitney talks about this, Whitney Johnson, right, with her S curves of learning, that
That's right.
by the time you've mastered something and you really, like, it's on autopilot, you drive home and you don't know how you got there, right?
That's right.
That can actually begin to decrease the satisfaction and the excitement and the challenge that you bring. And then that's time to get started on something new, which, often means taking on a challenge that you're not good at, which is the big question, right? So do I go from something where I got this nailed? Yeah, it can be very scary.
It's scary, but you see, that's what the high achievers learn. So many people are afraid of failure. And then there are some people who are also afraid of success. But the high achievers, they actually fear not trying more than they fear failing. They're okay with failing as long as nobody dies. But they're okay with failing because they use that as data. And then they try again, which is that second element, right? Of they're in control all the time because of their work ethic, their perseverance, and looking at past failures as opportunities of, this is what I can learn from this as I try again. So they very much fear not trying more than they fear failing. But going back to that first piece of intrinsic motivation, one of the things when I work with people, I really encourage them to go through what is called a passion audit. And a passion audit really helps you decipher between what you are good at and what you are not good at. What you are good at and don't enjoy versus what you're not good at, but you're passionate about figuring this out. It's a puzzle for you. And then there's all these things that you would do for free, and you probably already are, right? Look at how you spend your weekends. Look at where you're volunteering. So if anybody who's watching wants to do their own passion audit, they could just download one off my website, ruthgotian.com/passion audit. And there's a 3-column exercise with some guiding questions to really get you to figure out, what is it you're procrastinating doing? And when you procrastinate, what is it you're doing instead? Answering those questions will actually give you clues as to what it is that you are passionate about. And that's just one of the action steps. Now, almost every single time I work with someone and we do this, we find out that they're not leveraging what they are most passionate about. They're doing it on the fringes of their time. And we are looking for ways to actually bring that into their work. And many organizations love that people will bring what they're passionate about, because it actually elevates the entire organization. And I've found a few times that.
Yeah, I talk about that. I actually wrote a piece called, can agile working make wherever you work a better place, right? And that was really aimed not at people in a toxic workplace. And I want to get to that in a minute, but it's aimed more at people who kind of come to work and it's like, meh.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so how can you bring something that is really valuable to you into what you do during the working day?
Absolutely. And, this is what is so great, because people are open to ideas. You can't expect the leader to have all the answers. So coming to them with ideas of what you want to do and how you want to do it could be great. I have someone who said they wanted to start a podcast for their department. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Imagine a leader hears, this is something that I want to do. I'm willing to take ownership of it. Great. Go for it, right? So coming with these ideas is great. Now, I will caution everyone who's listening. I have done this with some people a few times, myself included, where we realized that what we were doing is not what we want to be doing. And that's when it was time for a shift in the career, a shift in what you are doing. But this is actually great, because this is data that you can use. And instead of going to work with that, as you said, that meh attitude, right, of just another day, it's another vanilla day, now you get to put your sprinkles on it, right? Because you can either infuse things into what you are doing or see what new challenge you can find.
That's such great advice. And I think fear holds a lot of people back.
Yeah.
So one of my colleagues is Amy Edmondson, who writes about psychological safety. And she says, look, why don't you just train yourself to ask continuously, what's the worst that can happen?
Right.
And when you do that, what you find is a lot of times the worst that can happen is somebody says no. Somebody says, well, we're not quite ready for that yet. Somebody says, well, we don't have the budget for that. But at least you're on record as having articulated whatever it is you did, the need for a raise, the need for more responsibility, whatever.
That's right. And you planted a seed.
Right. Yeah. So do you see these success factors have any kind of gender influence?
So I think where the influence is how people define success, which was my earlier research. And that's where that mixed methods research came in. It was not part of the book, but what I can tell you is that the definition of success is like perfection. It's a moving target. And everyone has a different definition of success, which is problematic in the workplace because very often we are working towards a definition of success we don't believe in. Mm. Now, this is where gender really plays a role because men and women look at success differently, what it is and how to achieve it. Huh. And it was interesting because the women kept saying that they want the objective metrics of success, right? What you can count, while the men considered the subjective measures of success, right? How curious you are, how bold you are, your reputation, right? While the women wanted things that people can actually measure with numbers. Now, there was also a difference between rank. So junior people considered success based on what their promotions depend on. Right? The things that they can count, the objective measures again, where the senior members were really looking at legacy, which is a problem because they are now judging people's promotion capability based on a definition of success they no longer believe in.
Interesting.
So gender and rank definitely play a role.
That surprises me, though. We always hear that women are supposed to be, we think about collaboration, we think about how well our team is doing, that we have these more qualitative measures of success, and your research suggests exactly the opposite.
So that is how other people think women are looking at it. But if you ask the women themselves, they know that they cannot be judged based on their collaborations. That will not be considered for their promotions. So they said, judge me based on things you can count, so that therefore it's black and white.
Well, this is so interesting because one of the things that to me flows over into our leadership choices, who we choose to elevate as leaders. And I'm working with an organization right now that is really trying to increase the diversity of its senior ranks. And they have a very cookie cutter image of what a leader in that organization is like. And he is tall and white and, speaks with a deep voice and has a lot of confidence and,
and a certain age.
A certain age has a strong executive presence. And what we're trying to introduce into that organization, and by the way, this is not unusual, so I'm not giving away any palace secrets here, but what we're trying to introduce into that organization is a way of measuring leadership capability that is independent of things like executive presence and carries the room and all that stuff. And have you found anything that would help with that, perhaps elevating different kinds of leaders?
It's so interesting because everyone thinks that it's the extroverts that make the best leaders, right? And trust me, I'm a 95% extrovert. I have been tested many times. So yeah, right, I'm for it. But actually some of the biggest leaders, especially some of the scientists, were extreme introverts with very soft-spoken voices. And it's interesting to me that all of these things that we thought about leadership to have that cookie cutter of what people are looking for, it's actually the exact opposite very often. So I think we need to stop judging people by the tone of their voice, their height, their gender, and really about their past accomplishments and how they can relay those past accomplishments towards future potential. But you have to do both because that is how it'll be a lot more equal.
Yeah. Well, in it, I think we've seen some organizations that are starting to do this. So, for
Yeah.
example, there's a woman named Kathy Murphy who just recently stepped down as the president of Fidelity Private Investments.
Mhm.
And she, among many other very interesting things she did, she moved to a very agile team structure. And it was a huge shock for the organization because basically it was a
Yeah.
hierarchical organization that was being flattened into these sprinting kinds of agile teams. And it required people to say, I'm willing to step out of my, level 2, rank 4, grade EQ
Yeah.
role and into a leadership role where I'm leading these diverse, permissionless teams that are doing work without having to get my permission. And actually, they're doing work that they pulled into their teams without my having to assign. I mean, for a lot of these leaders, it was like their heads were going to explode.
Yeah.
But what she did was she actually did a very rigorous assessment using Liz Wiseman's work on multipliers versus diminishers.
Yep.
And what she found was exactly what you found as well, which is a lot of times the multipliers are people who they're not extroverted. They bring out the best in other people. They don't have all the answers. They don't try to give their team the solution. They don't try to add too much value, right? As Marshall would say.
Right.
And I find that so interesting because, as Thomas Chamorro-Premuzic would argue, is so many incompetent men become leaders because we value those other things, right? It sort of we confuse confidence with competence.
That's right. And I think we also have to realize that there's different leadership styles for different times.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when we saw, especially during the pandemic, was some leaders thrive and some absolutely tanked.
Mm-hmm.
Because crisis leadership is very different from regular leadership. Usually, in our everyday non-pandemic times, you want a leader who encourages people but doesn't tell them what to do. Right. They're able to pull the best out of each person because they can see things the person themselves doesn't yet see. But in times of extreme crisis, when people are afraid for their safety, that's when we need a battle time leader. This is when the one time we want to be told what to do and how to do it, because our brain cannot handle one more stressor. We cannot handle one more decision. And especially for healthcare workers and all the frontline workers who were working during the peak of the pandemic, their brain was on overdrive. They just wanted to be told what to do, how to do it, how to keep themselves safe, how to keep their patients safe, how to keep their family safe. This was not a time of let me pull the best out of you. This was a time of let me keep you safe.
Right.
And knowing how to make that pivot is hard.
Well, and Tom Colditz talks about this. He wrote a fabulous book called In Extremis Leadership, and he makes the observation that the movies betray us.
Yes.
That the movies, when you look at a leader in a movie and they're in a crisis situation, mm-hmm. they're banging the phone down, they're yelling, they're running around all it. And what he would observe is what really great leaders do in a dangerous situation where people are concerned for their safety is they reduce the emotional temperature.
That's right.
They get people focused on something other than themselves. So this is where the tell me what to do comes in, right?
Yes.
If my job is to take this pen and move it from here to here all day long. Like, just tell me to do that, right? Yes. And I think it's absolutely fascinating that you do have this shift in style. Tom would also say, though, that to be effective in a battle situation, in a wartime situation, you need to have built up the trust bank in advance in a peacetime situation.
That's right. That's so true. And look, I think this is at the end of the day, at peace or war, pandemic or not, people like to work. And people like to follow, and people like to collaborate with those whom they know, like, and trust. Mm-hmm. And the one thing we can do every single day is work on our relationships so that people can know, like, and trust us, and we can know, like, and trust them. Mm-hmm. Because when that happens, incredible things happen. Incredible things happen. That's why I love our Thinkers50 community and our 100 coaches community, because these are people who technically should be competitors, but we know, like, and trust each other. And that's why such incredible collaborations have come through from those communities. Mm-hmm. And if that can happen between competitors, technically, then why can't that happen in the workplace? We need more of that.
Absolutely. So let's not lose the idea from the end of the book. So you got a couple of different tactics. You got the passion audit, which you talked about. You also talk about mentors, a mentoring team, and building communities of practice.
Yes. So as I said, all the high achievers surrounded themselves with a team of mentors. And a team of mentors, these are diverse people from different fields. And that's where most people get it wrong. They look for somebody older, wiser, male, or from within their organization, or they look for someone who looks exactly like them. And that's especially true for marginalized groups. The problem is, if you are like me, a woman like me, somebody who is male can give me incredible insights, but also cannot empathize with some of the strategies that I'm going through. They can't relate. It's not that they don't want to, they can't. Mm-hmm. Now, if I'm looking for a woman, the numbers don't lie. They're just not as many there, right? So if all the women are constantly going to be mentoring more junior women, they're not going to have time to do their actual work. Now, what can we do instead? Is we really want to diversify our mentoring team so it's our own version of perfect. So you get people from different organizations, different industries who have different strengths and different perspectives who can teach you things. And this is not a dissertation committee or a board. They don't all need to get together. They don't even have to know each other. You can call upon different people at different times. So my mentoring team includes physicians, scientists, educators, business people, military, and journalists. That's my mentoring team. Very, very different perspectives. And I talk about how you need people at 3 levels. You want people who are senior to you for all the obvious reasons. You want the peer mentors. Those are the ones who can empathize with you, but also peers rise together. And you also want people who are junior to you, because they can teach you quite a bit as well. And they are also going to reinvigorate and re-energize you and the team around you. So anybody who's listening, if they want a worksheet for that as well, look, I'm an academic. We always have worksheets, right? They could just download it from my website as well, ruthgotian.com/mentoring team.
That's fun. That is really fun. Well, one of the things that we teach at Columbia when we talk about networks is we talk about 2 kinds of networks, right? So the entrepreneurial network is this huge network of weak ties. And if you look at effective entrepreneurs, they're like 2 phone calls away from the answer to just about any question. It's not that these are people who are their dear friends. It's like, I met a guy 5 years ago at a conference. He's a world's leading expert on 3D printing. Let me see if I know anybody who knows him. So that's like the wide weak tie networks.
That's right.
And then the execution networks are the very dense. We trust each other. We can finish each other's sentences. We don't have to kind of explain from first principles every time we're doing a project together. And I think it's interesting that one of the things we've found is women in particular tend to over-index on the dense networks, the execution networks, and they don't spend enough time nurturing the broader networks.
That's right. That's what Sally Helgeson talks quite a bit about in her book, How Women Rise. Women are really good at collecting people. We're really good at that, but we also don't leverage those people. And as you said, we don't leverage those weak ties. And the research has shown those are actually the people who will help you more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you get jobs that way, right?
That's right.
Yeah, you get new situations that way. And I mean, one of the things I try to do when I'm mentoring younger people is create those connections. Right? Oh, you should meet so and so. And I remember when I was an assistant professor, I'd go to like the Academy of Management or something, and at the academy they would have these drink tickets, and so I would buy like a whole string of these drink tickets, and I'd walk around the big opening reception, just introducing these PhD students and young scholars to other people who were more senior that I happen to know. And they'd have their drink ticket and they could give it to anybody that they wanted to. So it was just it sounds sort of silly.
You were the favorite professor.
I was totally popular. Yes, absolutely. But I mean, it sounds trivial, but it's really important. If I've met you, when we've had even a 5-minute interesting conversation, I'm much more likely to remember you. I'm much more likely to say, somebody asked me about law. Maybe that person would be interesting. So it's I think we undervalue sometimes how much those introductions and meetings mean for people.
It's so true. And I think that the problem that most people have, the biggest challenge that I hear from people is that they don't know how to initiate these conversations. And it becomes awkward. And do we really need to talk about the weather? And no, you don't. That's why I actually give conversation starters, because it is very, very challenging. My most popular article ever was actually in Nature. And it was titled, I'm looking on my wall because I framed it because it was that popular. It's called Networking for Introverted Scientists. Now, it could be scientists or any other profession. At one point, it was in the top 1% of all Nature articles. And Nature is a pretty big journal in the scientific world. And it is such a challenge for so many people. And I do want to give you this strategy to anyone who's listening. First, when you meet someone, please don't ask them for anything. Don't ask them to help you, because you have to get them to know, like, and trust you. That is what you are doing. You are working to develop a relationship. This is not a transaction. So forget going into a cocktail reception or any reception or any dinner party with the mindset of, I have to get this as a result. I have to establish this. I have to accomplish this. No, you don't. You need to only work on meeting people and developing relationships. That is it. That is the goal. Get people to know, like, and trust you. Find a common thread that you can talk about. People are always asking me, how did you get to talk to astronauts and Nobel Prize winners and NBA champions and Olympic champions? I don't know the first thing about their field or their industry. I never asked them for a thing. I met one astronaut, one Olympian, et cetera, and I got them to know, like, and trust me. And after a while, we got to start talking. And after I interviewed them, they saw how I was going to use that interview for good. And they referred me. So 95% of the people who I interviewed in the book, which has some pretty well-known people in it, they were referrals.
I was going to ask that. You have to talk to all those people. That's great. So let's talk about this moment where we are. So it's May of 2022, for just to put this in historical context. We're 2 years in plus to the pandemic. We've got disaffection in the workforce. People are saying, work is horrible. It really stinks. And to me, I think a lot of the advice in the book could make that better. Like, you can take your own sense of agency and bring that to wherever it is you're working. But also, we're starting to see, like, I'm returning to the classroom. We were just talking earlier about, like, I commuted 2 full days this week, and it has knocked me for a loop. Like, I had not calibrated somehow what I was trying to get done this week with travel again. So right. Is that happening to you too?
It's happening. And I want to tell you, after presenting on Zoom for so long, to actually teach in front of real people, I was so excited that I started saying yes to everything, forgetting that I am now 2 years older. I have been mostly sitting for 2 years. I forgot what that travel is like. And I forgot certain things, certain props I used in my workshop, et cetera. But I also realized that I had some of the workshops that I did. I had the same plan. Obviously, I made some adjustments. But what I realized was, and I had my, anyone who teaches, you usually teach, basically what you're doing every minute, right? You have that all planned out, especially if it's a half-day workshop. I actually had it out because I realized that things I used to give 30 minutes for, I now needed to give 20 minutes for, because the participants' attention span has decreased. And that was something that I hadn't expected. So I needed to make adjustments on the fly. I also made notes so that the next time I do this, I can actually keep that in mind. I also realized a lot of hotels got rid of desks, which is a problem because I used to do a lot of work in hotels.
I have noticed that. Absolutely. Yeah. They make you perch on a little coffee table or something.
Or work out of bed, which I know a lot of people have done for 2 years. But for those of us who like to actually sit at a desk, we miss the desk.
That's funny.
So we've had to make adjustments, and travel has been rough, and I have to, I've forgotten a few things, but I guess it's like riding a bike. After a while, you get used to it. You're just going to forget some props and have to make some last minute purchases and run back to the airport if you forget your picture ID, but it'll come back.
Rookie mistakes, right? So I'd love to kind of get your sense of what guidance you would give, particularly to younger people. I know I get asked a lot, like, you got someone who perhaps is just starting out in their career, maybe a few years in, but they're looking at this array of choices, and it seems a lot more diverse to me than perhaps the choices I felt I had going like out of college or whatever. And looking back, I think I intuited a lot of what's in your book and sort of followed the winding path there. That way. But it would have been helpful to have more of a map.
Yeah. As long as your map has an eraser and you can change your course. So I think one of the things, and look, as a mom to 2, almost 3 college kids, I can say your path now is not going to be the same as the path it'll be in the future. But one thing that you can realize is if you follow your passion, what you are truly interested in, you will get there and figure out what it is that you need to do in order to get there. And surround yourself with people who will support you and be your cheerleader in order to help you figure this out, because you don't need to figure it out on your own. And if you want to see what's out there, what opportunities exist, because half the time we only know what we see, we may not know what else is out there. So I encourage you to listen to other people, talk to other people, take those LinkedIn learning courses, listen to the webinars, listen to podcasts. Your mind will open up, and all of a sudden you will start being aware of things you didn't even know existed. And before long, you're going to start making those connections between 2 disparate things that you hadn't realized can be combined, and no one else did either. And that's what will put you on the road to greatness.
That's fun. That's really fun. So were there any surprises that you hit along the way as you were bringing this book into the world and sort of getting all the stuff up on your website? And, I always find when you put it out there, right, there's always stuff that, other people see things in it you didn't see. Other people react to it in a way you didn't expect. It's always interesting.
So I have been getting pictures from people all over the world where they take the book and it's tabbed out. They put Post-it notes with things they want to refer to. They're writing in the margins. That, to me, is such a good feeling to see that people are getting such great use out of the book and really learning things, because I didn't just want to talk about theory. I wanted to talk about action and steps that people can take in order to implement these things immediately. So the fact that I'm seeing all these books that are all tabbed out is really pretty exciting. The other thing that surprised me in a really good way was that so many of those who are in the book took it upon themselves to help publicize it. So NBA champion Zaza Pachulia talked about the book on NBC Sports, which is wild. Astronauts and Olympians actually took videos of themselves describing what the book is about and sharing it with all of their followers. Little old me writing the book in the middle of the pandemic while mourning my father, and it was just me and the screen. I never thought it would have this reach. I just wanted to write something good because a Surgeon General suggested I do it. My father's nudge was there. This was actually the time. So I wanted to write a good book. Never did I imagine that it would have this ripple effect. But, my mentor told me, and Dr. Fauci said the same thing to me. He said, do something important, not just interesting. And I feel I've picked something important, and I'm glad it's having that ripple effect.
Yeah, I think people are interested in what does success look like, and in a very fractious time, a very polarizing time. I think you found some themes that everyone can look at and say, yeah, I can see that in myself. I can see that in others. So we're looking at I mean, is there any advice you'd have for somebody who feels that they're just stuck? It's a toxic situation. They can't get out from under it. They're in a bad place in terms of their ability to command a salary, whatever. Is there anything that you might suggest somebody like that could start to work on?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to help put things in perspective and figure out what it is that you can control, because not everything is out of your control. And I think those are the first things that you need to start doing, because high achievers work incredibly hard to control what they can control. And they don't worry about things that are out of their control. And I think if you can start figuring out what is in your control and leveraging that, you will see things start to change in your favor.
That's interesting. That's very interesting, because I do think a lot of people feel this sense of lack of agency. Just
that's right.
All these decisions get made for me, and I'm not in charge of them. And maybe that's part of what this whole Great Resignation issue is, right? Which is people trying to say, I don't need to be in this situation, which I'm not passionate about, I'm not happy about, I'm whatever, and feeling more empowered to do that. And I'm wondering where that's coming from. My personal hypothesis is I think we've kind of gotten to this point for many jobs in the economy where they're just terrible jobs. We're treating people like poorly performing robots, and we're not making the best of what human beings bring to a situation.
That's right. That's right. And I think what worked before is not going to work now. Mm-hmm. And the leadership from before is not going to work now. Mm-hmm. And every time there is a pivot, this goes back to a new job, a new house, a new child, we start to reprioritize things. And that's what the pandemic did for a lot of people. The difference is it happened in mass. So it wasn't an isolated incident here. This one had a baby, this one got married, this one moved, this one lost a parent. It wasn't these isolated bubbles that happened. It was happening to everyone, and everyone said enough at the same time. And that's why it had such a shock to everyone. And that's why I don't think we can go back to exactly the way it was. We need to find a happy middle.
Yeah, it's a real inflection point. I think, that this, and I hadn't thought about it that way before, that, that it created this break in what was, right? It disrupted the continuity of perhaps open thinking.
That's right.
Very interesting. So what are you working on now? What's next?
Well, definitely going on the book tour, which is really exciting, and writing and talking more about this, and getting ideas for book number 2 and 3, or 3 and 4.
Oh, wow. And do you think it'll be something similar?
Something with success and mentoring seem to be my go-to topics. That's what I'm most obsessed about.
That's great. And in your day job?
And I have a day job, yes.
How would the day job go? What do you do in your day job?
It's not too dissimilar. My job is to make people successful, and teach them different ways in which they can do that and help them become successful. So I do a lot of the leadership development, faculty development. I publish with a lot of our faculty because I enjoy writing, and because getting an idea and putting words to it is not as petrifying to me as it is to other people. Other people just don't like it, and they just freeze. Mm-hmm. I don't have it. You can start talking, and I can start building that into a story in my head. And I tell people my commute to the office is actually when the story starts coming together in my head. And then I run and then to the office, turn on my computer, and I can't type fast enough. Mm-hmm. But once it's in my head, it comes out. And that's how the Forbes articles come out so quickly, because once it's in my head, no problem.
Yeah, I've
been in a few of them.
I have. Thank you very much for that. So Ruth writes a regular column for Forbes, for those of you that want to follow her work. I find I learn a lot when I write.
Me too.
Some of my colleagues, they hire ghostwriters, or they have co-writers, or they do like the outline and somebody else fleshes it out. And I find that I can't learn that way. I guess maybe it works for them, but not, it doesn't work for me that way at all.
I would love someone else to edit my work, but the writing is me.
Yeah, that's different. No, I'll never forget. I was one of my best editors ever, is a woman at Harvard named Melinda Marino, and I had written this book, and it was written around the phases of competitive advantage. So you create a competitive advantage, then you exploit it, then it's done. And then we were like nearly at the end, and she kind of looked at me, she said, this is just not working. And I was like, excuse me. And she said, no, what you need to do, it was written kind of this way. And she said, no, really, to make it work, you're going to have to write it this way. Yeah. And it ended up being, she was totally right. I mean, it was the right way to approach it. And it was a much more powerful book as a consequence. But boy, oh boy, that's a few months of distress. Let's just put it that way.
Rita, I feel your pain because my chapter 1 was rejected twice by my editor after I had a book contract. And my problem was, I'm an academic. I was writing it like an academic. Nobody wants to read academic writing.
No.
Right.
No.
And my editor knew that. And I reached out to a friend of mine who had written a very popular book. And I said, well, what am I going to do? I can't get past chapter 1. And he said, well, what are you most excited about? I said, chapters 4 through 7. So he said, start with that. So I said, okay. And I started with 4 through 7, which are very actionable. That's when I start talking about the 4 elements of success, and that the words were just flowing. The last chapters I wrote were 1 through 3. At that point, I had found my voice. And that's one of the reasons that I write so regularly for Forbes and Psychology Today, is because it's a different style of writing. And that's a muscle that I need to work every single day, because those are the articles that people want to read. Those are the articles, if you want to make a change, if you want to make an impact, you need to start writing in that way. The academic writing is for my credibility. It's for my academic promotion. But this other writing is really to have impact. Yeah, and that's what the writing can work and the book can work. And that's why I keep doing it.
I had a colleague once who said, based on a study that was done of how many people actually read articles, and in my field, it would be something like Administrative Science Quarterly. Yeah. And he said, oh, if I knew who they were, I would direct the article directly to them. And he listed out 6 names. So, I mean, it's like a very small audience for stuff like that.
That's right.
Yeah, my agent forced me to put my most recent book in a PowerPoint presentation. For exactly that reason. He said, it just, when you talk or you teach, it's great. And when you get to word, writing, it just gets gummed up. So that was a very helpful lesson.
That's a brilliant idea.
So just summarize where people can go to learn more, because we are almost out of time.
Yes, the book is called The Success Factor. Wherever you love buying books, there it is. Wherever you love buying books, it's there. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, Walmart. Wherever you are in the world, you can actually find places all over the world on my website, ruthgotian.com/book. And I'll tell you places all over the world where you can find it. And social media is just my name.
There you go. Well, so if we didn't get to your comments or questions in the chat, we will capture them, and Ruth and I will get back to you with subsequent conversations. And thank you so much for spending an hour with me, and enjoy the weekend. And, remember, you can't bring filled water bottles on the carry-on. just bear that in mind.
That much I remembered.
All right. Have a great weekend, everyone.